All righty, welcome. I am Heather Pierce Campbell, the legal website warrior. I'm an attorney and legal coach based here in Seattle, Washington, serving online information entrepreneurs throughout the US and the world. Welcome to another episode of Guts, Grit, and Great Business. I'm so excited for our conversation today. I just can't wait for this. I've been looking forward to this one. It's going to be very different than any other conversation we've had on the podcast to date. And you're going to learn so much. Welcome to Oscar Trimboli. Welcome, Oscar.
G'day, Heather. Looking forward to listening to our conversation together today.
Oh, I'm so thrilled that you're here. And I know that I'm going to have mindset shifts. I'm certain that our listeners will as well. For those of you that don't know Oscar Trimboli is an author, host of the Apple Award-winning podcast Deep Listening, and a sought-after keynote speaker. Along with the Deep Listening Ambassador community, he is on a quest to create 100 million deep listeners in the workplace. Through his work with chairs, boards of directors, and executive teams, Oscar has experienced firsthand the transformational impact leaders can have when they listen beyond words. He believes that when leadership teams focus their attention and listening, they will build organizations that create powerful legacies for people they serve today, and more importantly, for future generations. Oscar is a marketing and technology industry veteran working for Microsoft, PeopleSoft, Polycom, and Vodafone. He consults with organizations including American Express, AstraZeneca, Cisco, Google, HSBC, IAG, Montblanc, PwC, Salesforce, Sanofi, SAP, and Siemens. He is the author of How to Listen, Discover the Hidden Key to Better Communication, the most comprehensive book about listening in the workplace, Deep Listening, Impact Beyond Words and Breakthroughs, How to Confront Assumptions. Oscar loves his afternoon walks with his wife, Jenny, and their dog, Kilimanjaro. On the weekends, you will find him playing Lego with one or all four of his grandchildren. Sounds like you live at our house with the Legos and the dogs. Anyways, welcome to Oscar. I'm so happy to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. And listening is something that we all get a little bit frustrated with when other people aren't doing it effectively, yet most people have never been taught how to do it, thus the quest for 100 million deep listeners in the workplace.
That's so interesting when you say it that way. Most of us have not been taught how to do it the right way. Like who among us thinks like, oh yeah, we actually need to be taught how to listen correctly?
One of our research pieces, we've had 22,000 people now take the listening quiz, but we've tracked 1,410 people over 4 years. And when we ask people, rate yourself as a listener, well below average, average, above average, and well above average, 74.9% of people rate themselves either as above average or well above. When we turn it the other way and ask them to rate others, 12% of people are rated above or well above average. So when the speaker is asked to evaluate the listener, they're 6 times worse than what the listener thinks they are. And we have a self-assessment bias. One of the reasons that is we've all been taught how to listen by our parents, by our teachers, by our friends, by our communities, by our cultures, by what's role modeled around us. But very few people really have any understanding of the neuroscience of listening, or even understanding the consequences of poor listening as well. So the work we do with the Deep Listening Ambassador community is all about bringing awareness that the first place to start listening is not focusing on the speaker. It's actually focusing on yourself. When people can tune in here, our research tells us 86% of folks are stuck at level 1, where they're still tuned in to many things going on from the last conversation, the next conversation, what they're trying to prepare for dinner, what have they got to do to take their kids out to sport. It could be happening for you right now.
Oh, I get it. The thing that I'm surprised by is when you say that most people still rate themselves as average or above average or above average. is I
Mm.
feel like the pandemic, at least for me as a parent, I was like, if I didn't have ADHD before, I definitely do now, right? Being at home, we were talking a little bit before we went live about trying to parent, having two children who are great kids, but also I would say fairly demanding, right? A puppy, a husband, like everybody being in the same space and feeling like I could just spend my entire day listening when I've got, you know, like other people, a lot of things to do and to handle. And I think the challenge is knowing, and I love that you raised this, knowing when to listen and how to have boundaries around when to listen so that we can do it well.
Many of us don't realize that we have listening batteries. Many of us don't realize that listening happens just behind the front of your skull, the modern part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. And we use a lot of working memory. This is a finite resource in our mind. And we can't, when it comes to listening in human dialogue, as opposed to listening to something that's pre-recorded while you're driving or listening to music, you can definitely multitask if you're listening to something that's routine, predictable, or music, it's enjoyable. You can do another task while you're doing that. But when it comes to listening, if you work in an environment where you're trying to create something, if you work in an environment where there's conflict, if you work with an environment that's resource constrained, if you work in an environment that requires collaboration, if you require to make decisions that involve trade-off, sounds like every conversation we have in the workplace, right? Then the only thing you should actually be doing is listening. And what most people don't do, the very first choice you have is the choice to decide to listen. Most people, just because somebody's talking to them, are socially conditioned to go, yes, yes, I will pretend I'll listen right now. But what they don't realize, they need to check their batteries. Is your listening battery green?
Mm.
Is it orange? Is it yellow? Is it red? Is it about to go black? The awareness to notice your listening batteries makes it a choice for when to listen, because the most generous and humane thing you could do sometimes, Heather, is to say, look, Heather, I acknowledge what you want me to listen to is really crucial and vital to you right now. I have to tell you, I've had a really draining conversation immediately before this. And if we could come back in an hour, my listening batteries will be fully charged and I'll be able to help move your thinking forward. Or tomorrow is a great time. I've got a free slot at 11. And this is magnified by video conference as well, because we don't have the gap in between that we normally had in the past. In the past, if you were working in a work environment, you had the opportunity to physically move from a meeting to a meeting. And that helped us slightly recharge our listening batteries. So here's a fun hack, Heather, if you want to recharge your listening batteries, because there's no point me saying, well, if your listening batteries are drained, do it tomorrow, we'll do it later. Play music, just one song, that's all you need. So in the book, we talk about the three songs I'm very deliberate about. And I have a song that's very instrumental, very slow, 80 beats per minute. It's called Weightless by Marconi Union. Most people will never have heard of it. A second song, Easy by Groove Armada, about 125 to 130 beats per minute. And then the last one, Remember the Name by Fort Minor, about 180 beats per minute. And depending on the conversation I'm trying to recharge my batteries around, I'll pick the song. Now, the song doesn't take long, but it rewires your neurology. It helps you. People say to me, oh, Oscar, listening is hard. It's draining. I don't look forward to listening. And I say, you're doing it all wrong. When you do it well, it's fun, it's light, and it's easy. But most people haven't been taught how to. Have you got some favorite songs that you might choose to play to recharge your listening batteries?
Oh, totally. Well, this reminds me, you say that, and I just think, one, you know, for anybody who feels a strong connection to music, which think if you're human, you probably are saying yes to that, right? But it's easy to forget. And last night, my daughter came in. She's not been feeling well. She's a little person. She's 5. And I've got Alexa right over there, right? I'm pointing to this little side table. There's a sofa behind me. And she just started telling Alexa to play certain songs. And my daughter's very upbeat, and I was like, after a few songs, I was like, Henley, you're a really good DJ. But I'd been kind of grinding away at work, and I just took a music break, right? Not from the context of listening like you're talking about, but totally felt recharged. Like stood up with her and had that little, and it wasn't long, couple minutes of music. And so I definitely can understand why that works. And I'm still just so enamored with the idea that we have listening batteries.
And depending on where you get your energy from, you just need to be cautious. Some people recharge their listening batteries in one-on-one discussions, and some people recharge their listening batteries much faster in group discussions. So you need to be conscious. Hey, I've got a listening battery. It's a very simple concept to transfer from your phone. Next time you look at your phone, look at the phone battery. Maybe there's a correlation towards the end of the day that your listening batteries are drained. Look, if you run your own business too, one of the things I would often say, it's difficult to separate work from home, home from work. And if you are in a place where you take a phone call and you're heading home and you're running your own business, park 2 blocks away from your home to finish the call. Finish the call 2 blocks away, so it gives you some separation between you and your business, you and what you're chasing, and that 2 block distance, it's long enough for a song to play. So once you hang up the phone, play a song and bring yourself back to home so you can be available so that your family can listen to you and your loved ones can listen to you as well. So this concept of a listening battery plays out in many ways. Now, the reality is, you may be in a conversation, Heather, that's got some kind of power differential, and you can't say, no, well, no, not right now. I can't have that conversation. You need to be conscious of that as well. The second thing I would recommend for you is drink water. Hydrated brain is a listening brain. The brain, 5% of body mass, yet it consumes 26% of blood sugar. So for highly complex cognitive tasks like listening, sometimes our head hurts because we're actually dehydrated. It's got nothing to do with what's going on. So a glass of water every half an hour is a good rule of thumb. How large or small you make that glass of water is up to you. It's just not the size of a shot glass, and it's probably not the size of a beer mug. It's somewhere in between those two.
What comes to mind as you say all of this is just like so much of what you're saying sounds like mindfulness, right? It sounds like there must be this connection. And I love what you said first about the first step of listening is really not about other people. It's about tuning into yourself. And I just think of how frequently we don't do that, right? We're in these worlds and lifestyles and workplaces. And for me, my workplace being home currently with small children, and how frequently we are called upon and demands are made of us that we feel like we don't necessarily get to control. But what we do get to control is the tuning in, right? And checking with ourselves and doing what we can to take care of ourselves. And I just love that the strategies you are sharing feel so accessible.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I haven't studied the field of mindfulness, and I respect all the people in that field. I think it's super important work, and listening is a skill. It's a practice. It's a strategy. And for many of us, just really basic building blocks are crucial to build a foundation towards listening, because one of the things we don't even notice is our attention. So do we pay attention to somebody? or do we give attention to somebody? Now, I want to caution you that neither's correct or incorrect, neither's right or wrong, neither's better or worse. What you need to be conscious of is which one's appropriate for the kind of listening you need to provide in the moment. Whether it's giving or paying attention, you can't do either continuously. So you need to be super choiceful about that moment when you're giving or paying attention. When you're paying attention, it feels like a duty, an obligation, a responsibility, taxation. When you're giving attention, it feels like an act of generosity. It feels like an act of empathy. It feels like something that's a shared experience. Now, again, neither's right or wrong. If you give attention continuously, those listening batteries are going to go from green to red in less than 30 minutes, unless you're a trained therapist, and listening's not therapy, Heather. Let's not confuse people with that. So for many of us to be choiceful about even where we direct our attention, for things that are kind of pragmatic and procedural, giving your attention is completely inappropriate. You probably want to pay attention, right?
So true.
But if you're negotiating the last 4 clauses on a contract to exit your business and sell it to a bigger organization, now's a really good time to give attention, because those last 4 paragraphs are the ones you've probably both been struggling with for a couple of weeks or months in regard to exiting your business, your passion, your organization. So just that consciousness, I don't think people are aware that listening starts with them. Number 2, I don't think they're aware of the quality of their attention. And the third thing most people aren't aware of when it comes to their listening is whether they listen for similarity or whether they listen for difference. Now, if you're brought up in an English-speaking Western education system, you are literally trained from the day you go to kindergarten to listen for similarities, to pattern match, to make sure that the evidence lines up in a way that's got a predictable pattern to it. Yet the breakthroughs where great entrepreneurial outcomes are achieved are occasionally listening for similarities and noticing patterns and then thinking differently about that. I'd love to tell you a story about Jennifer and Christopher, but have you got any kind of Spider-Man tingly feely about listening for similarity and difference, and which one you do, Heather?
Oh, well, first of all, I love just looking at listening from that lens, right? Because I don't think most of us think about it from that standpoint of like even the direction that we're trained to listen in, right?
And law teaches precedent, which is just a bunch of listen for similarity, right?
Oh, for sure. What I wondered is whether our brain naturally is inclined to look out for the difference, like which one of these doesn't look like the other, right? From a safety, survival, kind of a standpoint. So I'm not sure which I do. I suspect both, because I do like patterns and I think I recognize them like a lot of humans pretty easily. But also, despite my analytical, logical brain, I have a really strong creative half as well. I'm pretty equal brained. And so I think looking for the differences, I really enjoy as a person. So I'm not actually sure which one I do more of.
So we've asked this question globally to over 60,000 people, where we've run webinars and keynote speaking events for the last 5 years, and pretty consistently sits in the range of 88 to 92% of people say they listen for similarities as their primary listening preference, and 10 to 8% of folks are listening in the range for difference. Now, it's a false binary, because the useful answer, the productive answer is I listen for both, but most people aren't conscious that they're listening for both. And this played out to its logical conclusion is political discourse. It's like the other party can't do a single thing right. Everything they do is wrong and everything we do is right. So that's play out, listening for similarity to its logical conclusion and not being curious enough to be open to the possibility. So Jennifer was looking after 3 kids at home. She was a primary school teacher, but she decided for a period of time she's going to look after her kids at home. And her son, Christopher, he came home from school. And in a very enthusiastic, excited way, he said, Mummy, I'm so excited. I learned maths. I learned division. I learned that 3 is half of 8. Now, remember, Jennifer's got kids running around the house and maybe she misheard him. And she said, honey, could you say that again? And he said, oh, I learned the 3 is half of 8 today, Mummy. And she put her hands in her face and she thought, oh, what are they teaching kids at school these days? And she went to the kitchen cupboard and she got a packet of M&Ms out for her son, Christopher. And she lined up the M&Ms 4 by 4 like little chocolate soldiers all facing each other. And she said to Christopher, honey, could you count the chocolate soldiers in this row? And he went, 1, 2, 3, 4, Mummy. How many on the other side? And he said, 4, Mummy. They're all facing each other. They're all chocolate soldiers standing at attention. And she said, see, Christopher, 4, not 3, is half of 8. And rather than debate his mum, he leapt off the kitchen bench like Superman. He went to the corner cupboard and got a Sharpie, and on a piece of paper, he drew the figure 8. And he folded the piece of paper in half that had the figure 8 on it. And then he tore it in half and showed to his mum that when you take 8 and cut it in half, it's actually 3, right? Now, what's interesting, Heather, if you take that same 8, fold it in half horizontally, zero is half of 8 too. So 0 is half of 8, 3 is half of 8, and 4 is half of 8. Now, if you were listening for similarities, your mind would be going, oh my God, if you lost your mind, Oscar, but it's not 3 is half of 8, it's 4 is half of 8. And whether that's on the moon and Mars, the bottom of the ocean, 4 is half of 8. And what you're doing is you're listening for similarities. You're listening and pattern matching. Now, what you don't know about Christopher is he graduated college nearly 3 years earlier than his peers. What you don't know about Christopher is he's now a world champion bug catcher. He catches some of the most amazing bugs in the world. And the kinds of bugs I'm talking about are computer software bugs, not butterflies and other things. And some of you, when I said bug catcher, you may have visualized somebody with a net because you're listening for similarities. By the way, Heather, were you catching butterflies or were you thinking computer software?
It was catching butterflies on the first one, but when you said that he decided that 3 was half of 8, I knew exactly what he had done.
So he was thinking in geometry, and his mum was thinking in arithmetic. And for you as a business owner, listening to this, you're having conversations with staff, with customers, with suppliers, with legal providers, and you're screaming because they don't get that you're trying to explain to them that 3 is half of 8 because they're only listening to what you say, not what you mean. Now, Christopher has an amazing way of experiencing the world. He experiences the world through visual patterns. And what you don't know about Christopher is he's neurodiverse. Some people may call him autistic. And he perceives the world in a very different way. And that's why it makes him into a world champion bug catcher. But most of us are listening to what people say, not what they think, not what they mean. And I'm curious what you're taking away from the Christopher story for you, Heather.
Well, my creative brain is loving it, right? It's reinforcing what I already know, right? I have a child who's neurodiverse. And so much of the conclusions that we draw have to do with our perspective going in, which is also why I love this conversation around, the fact that We're never taught to listen, really, when you think about it, and listen the right way. The fact that there is a quality that we can bring to our listening or not that makes a dramatic difference to the outcome, and how probably even so many people, even those of us that really care about listening, are still doing it wrong, right? And thinking, how do we do it better? And what are the ways that are doing it wrong is impacting? Like for me, automatically, I think the little people in my life, the big people in my life, right? My business, but certainly the little people, because I think as parents, and I'll just speak to my own experience coming out of the pandemic and feeling so constrained during that period, stretched to the nth degree on a daily basis. Sure, my listening suffered. I'm sure it has suffered. I'm sure that many days I did it wrong.
Yeah. And be kind to yourself. It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
My wish for the world is if they knew these three numbers, listening would be really easy for everybody. Listening would be light. Listening would be transformational. When you listen in a world where 0 is half of 8, 3 is half of 8, 4 is half of 8, and who knows what else it could be, when you listen with this orientation, your businesses are more profitable. And if you're trying to sell them, they're worth more because you're solving bigger problems, because you're hearing your customers' really unmet, unspoken needs that they don't tell anybody else. So first, the dirty little secret of listening, Heather. It's not your job as the listener to comprehend what the speaker's saying. It's your job to help the speaker understand what they're thinking and what they mean. And when you do that, you create more loyal customers, more loyal employees. Suppliers will go the extra mile for you. So let's have a little chat about the three numbers: 125, 400, 900. These three numbers, if you know them, listening is really, really simple. It's my wish for the world and the Deep Listening Ambassador community. Once people know these numbers, confusion, chaos, conflict, frustration in the workplace kind of evaporates. We know that when people know these three numbers, meetings are shorter. Woohoo! Who doesn't love a shorter meeting?
Right? Oscar's getting a round of applause right now from everybody listening. Like, tell me how.
And more importantly, the meetings you do have, there's fewer of them. So not only are you having less meetings, but the meetings you do have are even shorter. So let's come back to these numbers. When you know these numbers, that'll be the byproduct. And you'll get more time with your family. You'll get more time with your loved ones. You'll get more time to do the things you really want to do because nobody wants to be in a bad meeting. 125 words per minute is my speaking speed. On average, in a Western speaking workplace, that ranges from 125 to 150. But 125 is a good guide. When you're listening to a horse race caller or a cattle yard auctioneer, they're speaking at about 200 words per minute, and you can completely understand everything they're saying at 200 words per minute. That is because you can listen at 400 words per minute. So we have peripheral vision, which means we can see things out of the corner of our eyes, and we have peripheral hearing, which means we can hear things that are not in our immediate zone of attention. A good listener gets distracted. A great listener knows they'll be distracted, and they have rituals, practices, and processes to come back into the conversation really quickly. So right now, you may even be listening to this recording on YouTube at 2 times speed. You may be listening to the podcast at 2 times, maybe even faster speed. And that's okay. If the accent, the topic, and the context is familiar to you, you can listen up to 400 words per minute and have complete comprehension. Now, you're testing the boundaries of human performance. We know that visually impaired people can listen consistently 3 times speed at complete comprehension, independent of context, independent of accent, independent of who's speaking. Therefore, you're genetically programmed to be distracted so we can survive. What was that rustle in the bushes in the corner? That's important to know. when you're a human out there in the savannah. It might just help you avoid the lion for a day.
Mm.
So you can listen 4 times faster than I can speak. Yet it's worse. Let's go to 900. If you remember any number out of these 3, please remember 900. 900 words per minute is your average thinking speed in a Western speaking, English speaking workplace. 900 words per minute. If you work in an environment that involves creativity, collaboration, some kind of constraint, anything that's time bound, you may be thinking up to 1600 words per minute, but on average, people are thinking at 900 words per minute. Here's the dilemma. Here's the dichotomy. Here's the paradox. If I think at 900 words per minute, I can only speak at 125. It means the first thing I say is 14% of what I mean. And if you have a conversation with someone with the first 14% of what they say, you're missing out on the 86% that they haven't said. Good listeners focus on what's said. Great listeners notice what's not said. They listen for what's unsaid. How's all that math washing over you, Heather?
My math brain loves it. I love numbers and I love math. So part of me is delighted because the visual part of my brain can see, right? See the difference and see the gap and understand how significant that is.
Mm. So there's 3 magic phrases that'll help you tap into what's not said.
Tell me more.
And when you know these phrases, and look, we'll just play with that a bit. Notice Heather couldn't really stay comfortable with the silence. She had to fill in the gap. But I think she was being a great podcast host where, people might have been shaking their podcast player going,
what people
what's
couldn't
going on?
see, yeah, was your coy smile that you gave right as you said that and then paused, right?
First thing to point out is this. Linguistically, if you ask a question that's got more than 8 words in it, as a rule of thumb, linguistically, it's a biased question. So if your question's got more than 8 words in it, it's biased. Now, let's wind that back. Bias is not good or bad. If you're prioritizing, you probably want to ask a biased question. If you're allocating finite resources, if you're decision making, you probably want to become biased in that case. But too many of us only operate in a world where we only ask biased questions. We ask biased questions so we can reload the ammunition in our conversational flow so that we've got more bullets to fire at the other person.
Right. My legal brain is calling this a leading question, right?
A leading question.
A leading question.
Do you have an example of a leading question we could share with the group, Your Honor?
Right. Well, it's the difference between, did you versus when you showed. It's assuming something rather than asking a question that could be answered yes or no, right? Or different ways.
Mm-hmm. So conversely, questions with 8 words or less are typically considered neutral. They're considered open. They're considered not biased. And again, if you ask a bunch of open-ended questions continuously, it will drive people completely nuts because they don't think you're listening. So use your judgment, but be conscious that most of us don't understand that from the way we speak, we're already coded to speak in a biased way.
Oh, it's so interesting. I was going to say they don't think you're listening or they think you're imitating a 5-year-old. Why, mommy? Why? What's that? Right? Like the simplest form of a question.
And when I interview suicide counselors and hostage negotiators, they would say be very, very, very careful when you use why questions. Definitely don't open up with them. Simon Sinek has got a lot to answer for, and he's got a lot to answer for his Seattle talk that's gone viral around TED. Now, Simon Sinek talked about start with why, but everybody has picked that up and said start every conversation with why. What Simon was saying Simon said, start with why when it comes to organizational purpose, but everybody's picked that up and put that in there. Now, what the suicide counselors and hostage negotiators, and even Supreme Court judges that I've interviewed, why questions are loaded with judgment. If you think about the first time, Heather, you ever got asked a why question, could you speculate when was the first time you ever got asked a why question growing up?
Oh, I don't know, but probably around why did you do that?
Yeah, it was asked by your parents when you did something that wasn't socially acceptable. You may have spilt the milk. You may have broken a window.
Twisted up in the curtains.
Oh, that sounds like an interesting story.
Yes, also the first time I told a lie.
Oh, so where were you? Tell us about these curtains. I feel like your very loyal listeners haven't heard this story.
They haven't. And the other funny thing that they should know is like I'm generally in my life not all that inclined to tell lies. I'm a fairly open person. I don't, luckily at this age, don't have a lot of shame. I'm sure I did when I was younger, but this was my first lie. I remember it so clearly. The one thing, and I have no idea, we were poor in Idaho and our curtains were nothing to shout about. Like, I don't understand why my mom was so concerned about the curtains, but we were not supposed to wrap up in them, right? Twist up. And the funny thing,
how old were you again?
5. The funny thing, yes, is now I have a 5-year-old. Guess what she loves to do with our floor length curtains that are, it's actually a really sheer one on the inside of the bathroom. We have this bathroom door that has French doors basically. And anyways, I get it. And at the time as a kid, I didn't understand, like, what is such a big deal about these curtains? So of course my parents went somewhere. My brother and I were playing a game and I'm sure I was hiding from him. So what did I do? I wrapped up in the curtains. Well, my mom could tell. She got home and she knew. And, it was like, I don't feel like we had that many rules like that about like, don't touch this or don't do that. But there I had done it, wrapped up in the curtains. And so of course, when they asked who did that, it was like, not me, the typical not me, right? And then later I came down because I could not live with myself. We got sent to our bedrooms and it was unbearable. So I had to come downstairs and confess that it actually was me.
Well, what I'm curious about is that listening to you tell that story feels very visceral. It comes from the whole of your body. It's not something that's very intellectual only. Is that true?
Probably, yeah.
And could you smell the room you were in?
Well, oh yeah, like dusty, not, like I said, not very nice curtains, right? And it's right by our back doors. And so I can see exactly where they were.
And as a result, the meaning you took from that story is,
I think probably, like, as I look at it now from an adult perspective and knowing more about my mom's journey, there were not a lot of nice things in her life at the time. And so I think it took a lot of effort to keep a house full of kids looking put together. And like curtains being twisted up and knotted up or whatever I did to them, was just like one of those triggering signs for her that things were not as they should be, right? So I think that was a hard time in her life. My mom came from a family where she didn't grow up feeling worried about being provided for, and marrying my dad and having children of her own and a lot of financial insecurity, like she just had a whole new experience of life that brought in a lot of stress and a lot of burden.
And what we've just heard is the difference between a story about a 5-year-old girl twisting in curtains versus what it meant to her mum. And as you listen to this is a beautiful example. When you listen beyond the words, you'll start to listen to what it actually means. See that magic Houdini trick I just did with you there, Heather? That's trying to help the audience understand that, number one, they love the fact you shared that part of your life with them. So thank you for doing that. I think it's created a completely different connection with you. But maybe for you too, a different kind of connection with your mum in a way you hadn't thought about before too.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
And then the multi-generational implications of that with your daughter and her own curtain twisting going on as well. So I think when you're present enough to know, like, back to my point, it's not my job to comprehend what you said. It's my job to help you understand what it means for you. So for me, it was what it means to you is what it means to be a mum today, and what it was like for your mum then. And kind of you did a bit of a compare and contrast. And I sense some deep empathy and some gratitude for where you're at right now, and gratitude for your mum and all the things that she did for you. And in a weird way, it's like, wow, there's listening stuff, Oscar. I get where you're going, right? Is that when you smelt the dust, that's where I was going, right?
Yeah, totally. I think the thing that I was reflecting on is actually, as you just said, what you talked, I mean, basically reflecting on the power of listening done well, which is what you just demonstrated for us, is the times, like, and for listeners right now listening to this podcast, the times that you have sat with somebody in your life, whether it was for 2 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour, and felt deeply listened to. I'm guessing that for most of us, that has happened less than a handful of times. Like that's the stark reality, I think, of when you truly connect to what it means to either have demonstrated for you or have experienced listening done well. It's not your everyday experience for most people.
I've been told that Eckhart Tolle is the person who said this quote: done well, the line between listening and love is completely invisible. Now, when I mean love, I don't mean it in a romantic way. I just mean one human acknowledging another human in a way that humans can do. Thanks for sharing that with the audience. I bet when you got on today, you didn't think we'd be twirling curtains
talking
in
about
Idaho.
my first lie. Yeah.
I think just remember this. If all you do is fixate on what people say, you're going to miss the joy, the richness, and the connection that we just experienced together. And I don't mean Heather and I mean you listening to Heather. I am just an interloper in this conversation. I'm galloping like a gazelle through the savannah of this podcast series. But the amazing Heather, your host holding this space, you've learned something amazing and powerful about her. Heather, I'll give you 3 questions to help unpick what's not said. And when you do this, you'll create the experience we've just created. You'll have a person physically change their body state viscerally. Their head will sit differently on their skull and on the top of their spine. Their shoulders will change position. Their eyes will change position. Their breathing will change as well. Make these your own. So I'm going to give you 3 words.
Right. This is a writer downer, folks.
This is a writer downer, but my point is make it your own up to 8. So the first phrase is, and you would have heard Heather use it before, tell me more. Now don't say, tell me more. Make it your own, personalize it. I'm fascinated. Tell me more. I'm curious. Tell me more. Wow. Tell me more. If you just say, tell me more, it may feel really mechanical. It may feel like You're in a deposition with Heather and she's
Right.
got to
You're
get
being
all the details out.
directed to be, yeah, telling somebody more.
So 3 words, make it your own, keep it within 8. Easy to remember. Tell me more. Number 2, and what else? Now, please don't ask these questions consecutively because you'll create the impression you actually haven't listened to them. So pick one of these and make them your own. Pick one of these 3 phrases and make them your own. And what else? Now, if you wanted to abbreviate this one, you can do it skillfully and elegantly and empathetically. You can simply say, and I was in a workshop in a really big group in a hotel room, and the leader was saying something, and I happened to be there, and I simply turned to her and I said, and I walked away. And she ended up writing an internal blog post about it that completely changed her leadership style because she had a moment to reflect on her own thinking. Notice I didn't have to stay there for the and. Now, that's a very specific context. Please don't walk away from somebody's conversation when you've said and. It was in the middle of the workshop where we were teaching these 3 questions. First one, tell me more. Next one, and what else could be abbreviated to and. The third one is the most powerful. Use this with compassion and care. If you use this incorrectly, it could feel like intimidation. Use this when you're in a relationship with somebody. You can use this a lot more when you're in a relationship than meeting someone for the first time. If you're meeting someone for the first time, probably don't use this phrase. This is the ninja move of listening. This is the phrase that we know consistently across all English-speaking workplace cultures gets people to describe what they haven't said. Listen carefully. Here it comes. Now, don't worry, nothing froze on the video cameras, nothing stopped in the recording, and there's no coincidence that the word silent and listen share the identical letters. And people will make the sound that Heather's just made when you pause. In the West, we call it the awkward silence, the pregnant pause, the deafening silence. We have this malformed relationship with silence. In high context cultures, the Inuit, the Eskimo of North America, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Polynesian cultures, the Maori cultures, the indigenous cultures of Australia, the Amazon cultures, and the Eurasian cultures, the great traveling horsemen of the North. Silence is a sign of wisdom. It's a sign of respect. It's a sign of authority. And it's also a technique used to bring the group together for the purpose in which it's gathered. Using silence to tune the group into itself is a technique unfamiliar in the West, but not if you go to a Japanese meeting, as an example. So sometimes, Heather, I was working with West Point Military Academy, and the leader I was working with basically said, I've got a really big problem interrupting. What's the one tip you give me? And I said, well, I would suggest count 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000 when you notice they've paused because they haven't finished speaking. They're just pausing. I came back a month later and I said, how did you go with that? And they go, not so good. I took it to its logical conclusion. I was like, oh, what was that? Well, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000 wasn't working for me. And I ended up biting through part of my tongue to stop myself from listening. Now, this is West Point Military Academy. They have a different relationship with pain than most of us do. So please don't bite your tongue when it comes to listening to the other. Look, I'm not a perfect listener, and you train and teach what you want to improve on yourself personally. I've got lots of flaws too myself, but what I realize, Heather, is if I'm available to me, I can be available for someone else. And that's the work for all of us. 86% of people in our research, we're all stuck at level 1 with a distraction of life around us, whether that's children, whether it's our office, whether it's our business, whether it's electronic notifications. If we can tame that monster by pretending we're an orchestra musician and merely tuning our instrument before we go into the performance, listening becomes light and easy, and your listening batteries will get recharged rather than drained in a conversation.
I love that so much. I mean, I feel like here we are. I know, out of respect for your time, I have to acknowledge we're at the top of the hour. And like, I have so many more questions. Like, I know you did a massive listening tour, right? Basically, like 20,000 folks that you've researched over workplace listening, right? You have interviewed over 100 of the world's most diverse listeners. There's still so much that we could cover. And I'm so grateful for what you've given us. It's been so rich and deep and also accessible. That's what I love about this, is like, when you think about meditation, I think there's a lot of people that think, I can't do it, and I don't do it because it feels so hard. And because we do have these busy brains, right? And sometimes the whole point of meditation is just to like be quiet and get quiet and stay quiet. And that's really a challenge. But what you've given us, I feel like, are just very accessible strategies for pausing, being in the moment with ourselves, checking in with ourselves first, and then just with a very few simple strategies, being able to really change how we show up for people and listen for them, giving and even the difference between choosing the words paying attention or giving attention, right? The mindfulness around just recognizing which of those things are we doing is significant.
I'll finish up with a funny story about meditation. I was asked hey, Oscar, do you meditate? Are you into meditation? And I guess like, never meditated in my life. And eventually I thought, everyone's telling me to meditate. Maybe I should listen, So 2011, I decided I've never meditated in my life. I've never done yoga, none of those things. So I decided to do a 12-day silent meditation in the mountains around our city.
Like, let's not just dip our toe in. Let's like jump into the ocean.
Go hardcore. That would be like doing CrossFit permanently 7/24. So the ritual is very simple. The gong goes at 3:30 in the morning. You've got half an hour for ablutions. Meditation starts at 4 a.m., etc., etc. First meal is at 8 a.m., next meal's at noon, next meal's at 4 p.m. That's it for the day. And then you finish meditating at 8 p.m. and you get to sleep 8 p.m., get up at 3:30 in the morning, repeat. And we're on this huge concrete floor. I don't know anybody. We don't know each other because we're not allowed to talk. Huge storm blows through the venue, and the venue is the concrete floor itself is heated. It's the middle of winter, but the power's been knocked out. So we get given a choice on day 3. You can go home or you can stay here, but you'll be meditating on cold concrete. It's like, okay, well, I put the time in my calendar. I'll just do that. So I did. And then on the last day, the teacher basically says to all of us, you are now going to go back into your real world. Don't be upset with yourself if you can't meditate like this. And the gift they gave me was this, Heather. Meditation isn't a time or a place that you go to. Meditation is a state of mind. And you'll have to use your American cereal equivalent of this, and I'm not sure what it is, But the teacher basically said, if you can meditate whilst eating your cornflakes in the morning, that's all the meditation you need to do. If you can meditate while you're drinking a cup of tea, that's all the meditation you need to do. Meditation needs to be integrated, not a discrete practice. And for me, that was such a liberating thing to hear. And I've never, ever meditated 1 hour in my life with crossed legs since that day. But am I conscious every time I eat something that I need to be grateful for what's going into my body and to come to presence? You betcha. So don't meditate is my parting thought.
Oh my gosh. First of all, there's so much I love around that story, but the idea of integration, the idea, even as you said that I thought listening can be meditation, right? Walking can be meditation. Any of these things that we're choosing and tuning in to do and be mindful of can be our meditation. I love that so much. Oscar, what a joy. I've loved having you here. I love your area of expertise. This is so important to so many of us. And I think so many people really care about this. And like you said, they just have never known how to really do it the right way. So I thank you for being here and giving us so much to think about and some really great, but simple in that they're accessible. I'm not saying they're easy, right? That's different. It's up to us to decide how easy they are or not by doing them. But I really am grateful to you for sharing your wisdom. I know you have a quiz, a listening quiz. Do you want to take 1 second and tell us about that? Not literally 1 second, but just a minute and tell us about your listening quiz, and then we'll point people in the right direction.
Yeah, learn your listening barrier. If you take the 7-minute listening quiz, and most people finish it in 4.5 minutes, you can answer 20 questions about yourself, and we'll tell you what your primary listening barrier is. But more importantly, we'll give you 3 tips about what to do about it. They're as simple and as practical as the ones I've talked about already. And listeningquiz.com will open up a gateway to a great range of free resources, including our free 90-day listening challenge to practice that for a period of 90 days, and the podcast that you referenced, where you can listen to world-class listeners, whether that's air traffic controllers, or journalists, judges, neuroscientists, people who study animals, and you can learn about listening from deaf and blind people as well.
Love that so much. I don't know where my sound went for a second. Can you hear me? You're good. Okay. So yeah, if you are listening now, pop over, check out the show notes, because we are going to share the link to Oscar's listening quiz, to his podcast, Deep Listening. Oscar, I know before we went live, I said, I'll end with, where do you like for people to connect with you? And he's like, I don't. Let's send them to the listening quiz. I also love you for that. I think it's so good when we know our boundaries and we're so clear on what is for us and what is not for us. Anything else?
Look, I think my ego would love everybody to connect with me, but my higher purpose, 100 million deep listeners in the workplace, means that my invitation for you is to learn more about what gets in the way of your listening. And when you take the quiz, you'll find a series of ways to connect with me if you want to. And we've just finished a lovely Ask Me Anything interview with one of our deep listening ambassadors for Japan, where we talked about when you should not listen, when is the time to choose. How do you decide when it's effective and humane not to listen to somebody? So listeningquiz.com. Heather, thanks for putting them in the show notes. And yeah, I'm delighted to come back. We haven't covered the 4 villains of listening. We haven't covered the 5 levels of listening. Happy to come back. And
I would love that.
send your questions to Heather. I'll be happy to answer them on the next time we get together.
We'll do a round 2. This is an important topic. Thank you, Oscar.
Thanks for listening.